Hey guys, it's Madison, and in this video I'm going to be discussing just how much can you actually learn of a language in 1 week, just how far can you progress, can you improve, can you cram into your head in just the course of around 8 days. So a couple of weeks ago I looked at the calendar and realized in kind of a panic that the TOPIK exam was just 2 weeks away. Originally I signed up for the exam a couple months earlier in the fall with the hopes of practicing quite often and using this as a chance to improve my writing, to improve my reading speed, to improve my vocab, all of those things, but I had not really done any preparation for the topic whatsoever because I've been distracted by things like work, by things like the speech contest I impulsively signed up for, by other things that I was doing in life, and so I never really got around to actually preparing for this test that I had paid money for and signed up for. And so I thought, since I didn't prepare, in the months leading up to this, maybe I can kind of turn this into a cramming, really intensive learning challenge, really push myself for the next 8 or 10 days or so to see just how much I can actually improve in a short amount of time if I really try hard every single day. And so that inspired this video. Originally, my primary goal was to focus on improving my reading speed to see if it was possible to improve my advanced reading speed in just the course of a week, because historically when I've taken these exams, reading speed is one of my biggest weaknesses. The first time back in 2018-ish, I didn't even come close to finishing the exam. I think there was 10 or 15 questions that I just totally guessed on, which is not great out of 50 questions. And the second time I did finish, but I think I was guessing on 1 or 2 at the end. And also in the listening section as well, reading is actually quite important because you have to be listening to these fairly advanced topics by the end, and also skimming through answer choices at the same time, and my brain does not do both of those things at the same time. It's you can pick one, listening or reading. We're not going to take in information from both sources at the same time, and so I really struggle to skim through the options beforehand or in the short amount of time they give you for answering questions. And so really improving my reading speed I thought would be kind of the key to being a lot more successful on this exam. So my rough plan for this experiment was to take a pre-test at the beginning of this little cramming session and then kind of study intensively over the course of around 8 days that I had until the exam, and then I would take a post-test on the last day to see how much I had improved, how much faster I had gotten, hopefully, over the course of that week, basically. And so on the, I think, Tuesday and Thursday leading up to this challenge, I went ahead and took first the reading section of a past exam, and then the next day the listening section of that past exam, just to kind of gauge where I was going into this challenge and give myself a comparing point for when I later took the post-test to kind of see how I felt at the beginning versus the end. I will say during that pre-test, when I took the reading section, I was actually quite shocked that I finished in 65 minutes. I was planning on kind of timing myself just to see how long it would take me if I kind of, went at a good clip, like a testing pace, but didn't actually limit myself to the 70 minutes total that you have to do the exam typically. But I finished 5 minutes early. It took me 65 minutes to get through the whole exam, and I was really surprised. I was like, oh, I guess over the past 3 years, I have read enough to actually improve my reading speed decently enough to get to this good pace. But I figured that I was still trying to do this intensive challenge to see how much further I could improve the time. And also I realized during this practice kind of pre-test just how much vocab I did not know. Definitely more than the timing issue was just the amount of vocab on these advanced kind of high level topics that I just never actually look at in my daily life. For example, proponents or critics of some certain government policy, topics on economics, on ecological things, biology, traditional Korean art forms. There's a lot of kind of niche topics that I don't usually encounter in my daily life, even though I live in Korea and use it almost daily. So that was a big wake-up call that I definitely needed to improve, even more than my reading time, just my general kind of foundational knowledge in all of these different topics. So I kind of added that to my original goal, so not only just to improve my reading speed over the course of this week, but also to improve that foundational knowledge in those areas. And I also kind of thought that if I did improve that vocab, that it would naturally actually help the reading speed as well, because I thought if I understand more of what I'm reading, surely I can read it faster, right? That was my thoughts at least. And so that was me going into this week-long challenge. Now I'm gonna kind of break down what I actually did throughout those 8 days of the challenge. So I'll put up a chart of the actual time that I spent every single day on Korean. As you can see, the vast majority of it is that blue color, so mostly topic related stuff, although I did a few other things as well. So for the first couple days, I went ahead and broke down that pre-test that I'd already taken, combed through every single reading passage, every single question, every single listening transcript, and went ahead and put all of that vocab into Quizlets. Well, most of the vocab. There are a couple really niche terms that I figured I did not need to study, and so I put almost all of the vocab into those Quizlets and reviewed them occasionally throughout the week. Once I finished that, I turned to these practice books and took a practice reading exam again from this basic one. That's what it's called, the basic book, and it has like the vocab, grammar, and some practice tests, although honestly I only basically use the practice tests. And I was quite surprised actually. It took me quite a bit longer to get through the reading section, and I felt like there was just a ton more unknown, more difficult academic vocabulary than the first actual real old topic test, which was a bit discouraging on one hand, but also I figured it's probably just a problem with this actual book and that this test is probably just a higher difficulty level than the actual topic is. After the reading section on Sunday, Monday I took mostly a break. I reviewed the reading section from the previous day, but honestly I had the Korean class, and then also it was the last day that one of the webtoons I was reading was going to be free, and so I went ahead and like binge read that webtoon instead of doing more academic formal stuff. And so even though that day is actually the highest amount of hours out of the whole week, it was actually the most easy fun day because I was binge reading a fun webtoon versus like really intensively studying academic vocabulary. And so in one sense it was kind of my break day, even though it was the highest day, just because it was all fun activities for the most part, even though I did a bit of that Korean class and a bit of review of this stuff. And even though it felt like a break, I was still reading in Korean. Even though it was easier Korean, I was still, practicing reading and hopefully improving my reading speed. And so, still benefits there, even though it wasn't so academically focused. Tuesday and Wednesday I went back to this test, finished combing through all of the unknown vocabulary from the reading test I had taken on Sunday, as well as going through the listening section, taking it, and then reviewing all those transcripts for vocab as well. When Thursday rolled around, I knew this is the last day of just like practice stuff, and then I wanted to take the official post test the following day. So I went ahead and went hard this day and got this other book from the same series that just has some practice tests. And I went through an entire test from this book. I did the listening section, the reading section, and broke both of them down all in one day. It was like really intensive, really exhausting, but I did want to like push myself hard at the end of this challenge, and so I did it. Surprisingly, the level of this test was much, much easier than the level of this test, which was, like I said, very, very difficult. But this also had kind of a weird glitch in it, where in the listening section, for one of the little sections inside the listening part, the audio did not include like extra time to fill in the answers, which it usually does give you. So the listening section was actually like surprisingly challenging just for that reason, because there were some questions where I didn't actually hear half of the audio because I was actually trying to answer the previous question and stuff. So that kind of messed up my score for that one. But again, that was just a glitch in the audio for this practice test. I was just happy to see that this test difficulty was going back down and that this previous one I'd taken was in fact just difficult. And then Friday, that was the final day before the actual test on Saturday, and so I went ahead and took my post-test. I downloaded one of the actual past topic exams, just like I had for the pre-test, did the listening and reading sections, and then once again as the grand finale, went through and broke down all of the unfamiliar vocab in the reading section, the listening transcripts, and all the questions and answers as well. Now a quick note, unlike the first couple days of the challenge where I was making Quizlet sets and like actually reviewing intensively some of the vocab, by Thursday and Friday where I was trying to do a whole test in one day, I did not do that anymore. I was just looking up the vocab, jotting it down in my book, but didn't actually like make a Quizlet set and study it afterwards. And so that helped save some time when I was trying to do an entire test in one day. Now, I will say this process was actually incredibly exhausting. Over the course of the 8 days that I consider the actual like intensive studying session, not including like the actual pre-test test-taking days that I did beforehand, I did 33 hours and 5 minutes of Korean over 8 days, which is over 4 hours per day. Now, some of that was like reading webtoons every single day before bed, or those 2 hour-and-a-half classes I took on Monday and Wednesday, but still a vast majority of that was just topic preparation, which was extremely, extremely mind-intensive and extremely exhausting, like I said. And so I was so glad when it was over, honestly, because I was just mentally done with Korean for a while. I've done challenges before where I've done like 40 hours of language learning in a week and stuff, but that's always had like dramas as part of it. And so I don't think I've ever done like more than 22-ish hours of active studying in a week. And even on those like 20-hour weeks, it's usually stuff that I'm choosing on topics that I enjoy, not usually this kind of, economics, biology, government stuff that's not really in my wheelhouse normally. So it was definitely very, 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 very intensive, probably the most intensive week I've ever had in language learning in my life, and I'm glad it's over, honestly. But all that said, did I actually succeed? Did I actually get faster in reading Korean? Did I actually improve my vocab a lot? Let's talk. So first of all, let's talk vocab, because I feel like the results are the clearest here. So here's a chart of all of the unknown new vocabulary words that I looked up over the course of this 8-day challenge. I would generally break down the reading sections first before I did the listening sections, which is why generally the reading sections have a higher number of words, just because if there's any words that were repeated on the listening and reading section, it only got counted in the reading section. And as you can see, compared to the first 2 tests, which were both quite high in terms of unknown vocabulary. The last two tests were significantly lower. And if you combine the listening and reading sections for each test together and just look at them as kind of one lump sum of all the vocab that I reviewed for each test, again, the improvement becomes quite clear. So for the very first pretest, as you can see, there was almost 250 unknown words on that test, which felt like a ton to break down and try to review over the course of just a couple of days. And then, like I said, I was actually quite shocked when I got to the second test, the first mock test from just this practice book that, like I said, I think has an actually higher difficulty than the actual real topic exams. But I was shocked that even after I had studied these almost 250 words from the first test, there were still actually more unknown words on the second test, excluding all of those 250 words from the first test. So that's almost 500 words at this point in like 5 days of studying, which felt, again, extremely exhausting to study. But then finally, once you get to the last two tests, you can see the reward of reviewing all those vocab words, and definitely I built up a much better foundation of those basic politics and government and economy and biology words in my arsenal, so that it was a lot less unfamiliar vocab in each test. And as you can see, the last two are almost basically half of the vocab of the first two tests. So I was really proud of that. If you look at a cumulative chart of how much total vocab I studied by each test, by the end of the post-test breakdown, I had studied over 700 words of vocab throughout that 8-day period, which is, again, insane. Definitely the largest amount of vocab I've ever reviewed in a week. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but I do think it was good for kind of cramming and really kind of forcing myself to become familiar with a large foundation of advanced academic vocabulary in a very short amount of time. And I do feel like I was successful at not only recognizing a lot more words, but also having a better kind of guessing ability and kind of predictive ability. If I see a word, I can kind of guess better what it means based on roots and stuff. But overall, again, like I said, I was very happy with the vocab part of this challenge. I really feel like I really improved in that area. Now, as for my original goal of trying to read faster throughout this week, let's look at those results. So as you can see from this chart, the pretest, the very first test I took, was actually the fastest test I took. I got only worse from then. The second test definitely had the worst time by far. It was the only test that I actually went over the official limit for. But again, big asterisk there because the difficulty of that test was weirdly hard. It's harder than the actual topic exams usually are, and so you can kind of throw away that result. But even the other two at the end there, although they were under the limit of 70 minutes that the test actually has, it still was longer than the first pretest, which was kind of shocking and disappointing, I guess, to see. I was like, what? How did I get slower at reading over the course of the week? But looking back, I actually think I understand why that happened and why it was taking a little bit longer by the end compared to the beginning. And I think it's because actually, contrary to what I first thought, where if I understood more vocab, I would be faster at reading, I think actually because I had so many unknown vocab words in that first test, on some of like the reading passages or listening questions where I didn't really know what it was talking about at all, I was just trying to like glaze over the few words that I did understand and kind of make my best predictive guess based on that. I wasn't spending as much time actually trying to think through it and understand and like figure out which one was actually correct because I didn't really understand what it said. Whereas once I actually knew more of the vocab, I was spending more time actually processing, oh, I understand it. Let me think about what the correct answer is in this scenario, rather than just kind of making an educated guess. So that's my theory as to why it actually increased over the course of the week. Again, a little disappointing that it went in like the opposite direction that I was hoping, but when you balance that with the 700 words of vocab that I learned, I think overall that was a net positive. Although, when you look at my actual scores and how they changed throughout the week, it also was kind of confusing / disappointing. I kind of assumed that as I practiced more and more, my scores would, increase, even if just slightly, but they were kind of all over the place. If you look at the listening scores, you can see overall it did increase from the first day to the last day. And this one actually has an explanation for that weird dip. Like I said, that second mock test, the third test overall, had that weird audio problem where one whole section like didn't have extra time to mark your answers. And so I was totally missing parts of the audio because I was trying to actually answer questions and stuff. So because of that, I missed a few questions that are actually on the easier side that I wouldn't normally miss. And so that's a weird glitch and not actually an accurate representation of my abilities. So you can kind of ignore that low point there and kind of just look at the overall upward trend, starting at a score of 86 and at the end ending up with 92. So that's an overall increase, which is nice. Now the reading section on the other hand is a bit weird and disappointing because I started out on the pretest with an 88, ended up on the post-test with an 88. Yeah, so I will say that on that last test, I made a really dumb mistake on the very first question, the easiest question on the whole exam. I messed it up and normally that would never happen. So if you include that and also one other question that I still think there were two correct answers to, even after having read it, broken it down, I still firmly believe that there's two answers that are correct. And so if you include those two questions in there, I'm kind of counting that as a general overall upward trend as well. So looking back at this week, there were some mixed results for sure. I learned a ton of new vocabulary and felt a lot more comfortable with a lot of the general topics that get introduced on this exam. The government stuff, the economic stuff, the biological stuff, all that stuff. I feel a lot better about like generally reading and kind of having a rough idea of what they're talking about versus before where I was like, I don't really know what's going on. So definitely that was a big improvement, the biggest win of this week. The other results as far as like my score improving and my reading time improving, as you saw, were very kind of mixed results. I got slower in reading and my scores slightly improved, kind of, sort of. So you can read into that, but you will. Overall, I think it was a good experience, like a valuable experience, because I did feel like I really improved that vocabulary knowledge. But honestly, I don't think I'd ever do this again because it was just so like stressful and exhausting and just not fun. Like by the end of it, I was just tired of Korean, tired of reading these things and just ready to be over it. And so I don't think I'll do this exact thing again. If I do end up doing more intensive challenges in the future, I think I'll make sure it's on topics that I actually enjoy, not this like governmental economic stuff that's not really in my wheelhouse for sure. So yeah, overall, I think a very valuable experience. And even for the reading speed, my initial goal for this challenge, I didn't actually have high hopes going into the week that I would like dramatically improve my reading speed. I don't think you can really feasibly do that in just the course of 1 week in general. I think it takes much more, prolonged practice in reading to actually significantly reduce the amount of time it takes to read in a foreign language. So yeah, I didn't have these super high, unrealistic expectations, but I also didn't think that I would get slower at reading either. So a very surprising result overall. And honestly, the biggest takeaway from me from this whole experience that I kind of realize every single time I prepare for this exam is just how far away I am still from being like on a roughly equal level as a native speaker. Despite it being my 14th now, I'm in my 14th year of learning Korean. These topics like economics and government that I never talk about in my native language either, but I still know like how to talk about it very roughly, right? I still know those basic vocab words and those basic terms, even though I don't usually use them very much. But in Korean, it's just like, a whole new world of vocab that I just have not come into contact with enough to actually have learned those things. So yeah, just kind of a good overall realization. Despite how far I have come in the past 13, 14 years of learning Korean, I am still not anywhere near a native speaker level. I still have so much to learn. I already knew I had weaknesses, of course, but it is kind of a fresh slap of reality whenever I do this topic preparation as to just how much I still don't know. So yeah, on that positive note, I'm gonna go ahead and end the video here. Let me know in the comments, have you had any experiences where you kind of realized just how far you still have to go in your language? But yeah, I will see you guys in the next video, and until then, annyeong.